Hey guys, before the video starts, I forgot something in the video. I got to shout out Can't See Will on Instagram. This is Will, this is the homie. Helped with the thumbnail, made the entire background. Really talented artist, honestly. Give them a follow. Buy his stuff. Please follow, like it all, comment on every post. Be nice. Just be nice. Here's the video. Enjoy it. Hey guys, how's it going? Duke of Italy, your favorite lo-fi music YouTuber, and I'm loving this SM58. It's got me looking like a stand-up comedian or something. I know if I do it right over here, you can hear the plosives too much, and I didn't know that when I recorded my last video, so you probably heard it right there. But you know, that's besides the point, because today we're reviewing SHROOMCORE. Totally ridiculous thing here. But this is a little chart that we're doing to start off our October content. I'm a little later than I would have liked to be for October, but you know, it's okay. This video shouldn't take too long. It's just a bunch of mushroom albums. But it's not just any mushroom albums. It's all synth electronic based mushroom themed albums. More often than not, dungeon synth, occasionally a little bit of noise in here. There's even a new age album in here, a Japanese new age album. A lot of these aren't even albums. A few of these are just EPs. A few of them are like demos. But a little bit of spoiler, I am utterly impressed with the quality of these releases here. I'm the guy that listens to so much dungeon synth in a year that it's kind of embarrassing, in all honesty. Like, no one wants to listen to this much dungeon synth, you know. I know there's like I'm on a Facebook group of all things that's talks about dungeon synth all the time, and all the memes are just like dungeon synth related, but I'm like, really, how much dungeon synth are we listening to every year? Like, how many albums are actually worth your time? And the answer is like not that many. You know, I always think there's a good one, and then it ends up being like not that good. I know Putrid Marsh dropped an EP this year though, so that might actually be good. And there are a couple of dungeon synth albums I've heard this year that aren't bad at all. There was one from, I think it's Rate Your Music, one of their highest winter synth rated albums. That guy dropped a new album this year. It reminded me a bit of the new Ruichi Sakamoto album, Rest in Peace. Cool little ambient stuff there. And there was also a really weird, almost Bandcamp fodder type thing. I'm sure I'll mention it at the end of the year. But I'm kind of delaying the inevitable because this chart here is really interesting. I mentioned the quality of it before. I don't think there's really anything here that I hate. And there's a lot more of this that I love than I would have expected. Like, dungeon synth is weird because it's kind of a tough nut to crack in terms of a genre. You know, it's consistently falling short so often, not really because of its stylistic things, because even recently I re-listened to Depressive Silence's Morning, and that is an album that has a more orchestral and grand approach, but yet it still totally works. Maybe it was because I was taking a walk when I was listening to it, a journey to Kroger, but I liked it a whole lot. So maybe sometimes maybe dungeon synth is a tougher nut to crack than I thought, but it seemed pretty simple so far. So I'm wondering if these mushroom themed albums can have the effectiveness that they should. And the short answer is yes. We're going to start off with an artist called Mycologia. I might be mispronouncing that just a little bit. I'm not really up to snuff on my mushroom themed terminology, my fungus vocab. I actually have a couple buddies who grow mushrooms, so I should probably hit them up and ask them the lore of these albums to get more in-depth knowledge on these people with 4 ratings on Rate Your Music each. But this one is called Assorted Mushrooms of New England. Very pleasant release overall. Not too long, somewhat mysterious for a couple tracks, but it's mostly cute dungeon synth music. And all of these tracks are named after a different type of mushroom. I don't know if breed is the correct word, but a different type of mushroom is named for each of the tracks, such as Deadly Webcap, for example, which is one of the highlights on here because it really conveys a real sense of adventure. I'd say this is a fantastic album to pair with Dungeons & Dragons or going on a walk. It's pretty soft overall, not a lot of jarring textures, not a whole ton of tension. There are also some pretty great melodic leads on here. That is something that Dungeon Synth struggles with. A lot of times it's just the chords, but here you got some melodic leads that work decently well. And it's also got like this weird, odd, unidentifiable atmosphere for the whole thing. Maybe it's just because I'm not familiar with too much mushrooms, or even the area of New England for that matter. I've only been there like once in my life, but I mean, I don't hate this thing. It's all right. It's a good album, I think. I think it's totally worth your time if you're a Dungeon Synth fan. I think it's totally cute. I just think there's better stuff on this chart, stuff with a little more characteristic going on. Like this second album, which I can't pronounce this. There's no way I can, but it's spelled HCH apostrophe XHSH. And it's called About How Three Walking Mushrooms Tried to Cross the Forest. It's pretty short. It's under a half hour long. And I didn't even finish the title there. I have a whole second line of it. So, cross the forest, ... of the delightful nightmares, comma, and what happened along the trip, comma, and about how it was raining. It's like a two-sided release here. Pretty short, under a half hour long, pretty atmospheric. And what I like about this is the linear structure of the whole thing. It's very much like, it's not even taking you through songs as much as it's taking you through different sections. But unlike other Dungeon Synth, where it's like you have like 10 songs and they all kind of end up sounding different, these are like specifically chosen parts of a track, so they have to be different. Because if it's just another song, then chances are they're just going to align stylistically. The difference is going to be so minute. That's a problem that a lot of Dungeon Synth has, but this is not the case. You get really very different stuff here. I think this whole thing is actually bookended with like just rain sounds, or like artificial rain sounds, not real rain. Now, what I like about this release a lot is it can be pretty noisy, but it also feels very cute. It's literally about like walking little mushrooms, not like Toad from Mario, but like little mushroom guys. Mushroom Man from Yu-Gi-Oh! If you guys ever play Yu-Gi-Oh! There's even a point during the second track that the noise gets a little bit scary. I'm gonna say something crazy here, but Inferno by Blank Mass, this is like the Dungeon Synth version of that. Except like this makes me feel like a little kid again. I mean, I've always had an obsession with fantasy, and hearing this cute little thing here, it's so fun. The narrative is really fun as well, and it's so low stakes, but to walking little mushroom dudes, it's actually feels kind of like high stakes in a way. It's an interesting perspective. It's a bit comedic. I think there's a sense of humor to this whole thing, and it tracks better than Dungeon Synth normally does. Most Dungeon Synth literally feels like you made it in a basement, not because of how it sounds, but because of the lack of outside knowledge. But this feels rather aware. And next is Gifts Vamp with Satanical Symbiosis. This one's a little spooky. This one is super buzzy texturally. It's even a bit noisy. And the textures are just the wettest sounding things ever. Like the cave atmosphere is so true here. It literally feels like everything is just dripping and saturated. Not like dry to wet in terms of like effect, like ratio, but it's like they were modified to sound wet. And it actually sounds distinctly metallic on this release. You have like a weird, almost psychedelic bend with kind of how drony this album is, but it is super hypnotic. It's got really great atmosphere. In terms of the world of mushrooms and synths, this kind of leads you to think of like music that's made from plants, you know, that like you attach little like cables to. I don't know if that has any scientific legitimacy, but I've seen like posts where people are like, oh yeah, you can detect their little nerve endings or whatever, and it produces music. It feels like mushrooms doing that, but in this case, like in a cave. So the atmosphere is like really cool. It's definitely less of a humorous release. It's definitely more of an atmospheric, like properly, like it's trying to be creepy. And it's super silly, of course. Like just thinking of the concept, and you just get a little bewildered by how it's like nailed down. It works pretty well. This whole thing is a little bit one note though. You can't entirely take it seriously the whole time, but it's certainly not bad. I'd say this is a good release. This leads me into an excellent name for an artist, Myconid Rot Priest with Spore Possession. This artist is virtually unheard of. I wouldn't be surprised if I'm the only person to ever talk about this on YouTube, but it's some pretty spooky dungeon synth, and it has some serious dark ambient overtones. This one is really varied in texture, which I like a whole lot. Some tracks will legitimately progress through totally different palettes of instrumentals. Normally, this is a pretty minimalist sounding release, which leads to a really cool kind of brooding atmosphere to the whole thing. I really like it. And I'm not quite sure about this, but it sounds like there's some really cool modular synth work going on here. The way the textures are warped. Now, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong about this. You can listen to this and tell me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like there's modular synth in here that's being used in a way that's honestly super cool. Like I hear the textures just being fitted to fit whatever the next portion of the track is. I think it's a really nice addition. And if it's not modular synth, then whatever he did sounds cool. It's certainly a little silly on this one, but the fact that it progresses so effectively makes it just an overall really awesome little release here. I think it's great. Next, we get Old Dead Wood with Mold and Moss. This is short, just an 11-minute long EP. It is dark and droney, and it sounds absolutely fantastic in this little raw lo-fi recording style. It sounds so crispy. Some pretty cute textures here, mostly pretty standard, somewhat melodic style of dungeon synth here, but there's just enough croaks and creaking that to make it actually sound pretty nice. What I like about this release a lot is that it's completely drumless, and every track is pretty short, but they're all really hypnotic at the same time. I think this release here, maybe it's because it's an EP, so it's kind of safe feeling because it's so short. You can only even do so much, but I think it's honestly a really great listening experience. And now we got a banger, Fungus Exodus with Myco Sapiens. This one is dope. It's got some groany textures, kind of like GIF Vamp, but what's cool about this one is there are drums. It is a real drum kit, and it is this pounding doom metal style of drumming, which it's slow, but it's kind of krautrock-esque, the way it's just like repeated and repeated and repeated. It's crazy how it will uphold these almost 15-minute long track lengths. Overall, some really nice textures. It's super drony and even a bit spacey. It's maybe the most lethargic thing here. It's like you're watching a mushroom grow in real time, or taking mushrooms and watching them grow in your eyes at the same time. So it's really cool release here. Like, I'm not saying there's a space rock influence here, but maybe a little bit. I think it's actually kind of great. And now we're at Mirkwood Shroom with Demo 1. It's just a 10-minute demo with some cozy and kind of sad instrumentals. It's overall very minimalist. I think it sounds rad overall, but it's really just too short. You don't get enough ideas that are developed on, and it's not a necessarily super exciting listening experience, but it is very solid for what it is. If you want a comfy demo to listen to for like 10 minutes, then here you go. But yeah, it's a totally good demo. I'm sure they went on to make something better, or if I remember correctly, not much else at all. And then we get LBRP Self-Titled, which has this wandering, spectral, dark ambient. It's really cool. It's really lo-fi with a ton of reverb. It is like the most chilling release here. This is a really drony release, even more drony than Fungus Exodus, because it's all legato. It's really slow. It's really empty and depressing sounding. It's like your only company in the situation are these mushrooms, but it's not like a sentient kind of mushroom. It's just cave mushrooms. Maybe a little bit of glow here and there, but it's a depressingly simple album, and that it really revels in this isolated type of feeling. It's simple, and it's simply effective. I think this is a great, really atmospheric little piece of music. And this goes into a real banger with Philocophita, which I probably mispronounced, with Songs in the Language of Mushrooms. If you ever wanted to feel like you are a little mushroom man, other than that, about how mushrooms walk through the forest, whatever, this is the release here that makes you feel like a little mushroom man, because it gives you like a little, it's just 25 minutes long, but you're gonna get like a little dive into the culture of these people. It feels tribal, maybe a little bit primitive. They are mushrooms, of course, but it's simple, lo-fi dungeon synth, as it should be. That is how dungeon synth should be. Don't ever try to fake high fidelity dungeon synth. You gotta revel in that raw texture, and I've only seen it done better like a couple times, but here it's exactly how dungeon synth to me should be. It's got a really, really nice range of emotion. I mentioned earlier how on that album I just referenced, actually, how it has a lot of range of emotions in this really cool like narrative sense, but this one here feels like almost a collection, like a bunch of excerpts from a culture that doesn't actually exist. I'm not saying it feels like it doesn't exist. It is a super immersive experience. For as silly as the concept is, it is totally immersive. You hear some songs that are happy, and you hear some songs that are straight up mournful. It's very cute, and it's kind of awesome how airtight and consistent the whole thing is. The whole thing ending with death of an elderly mushroom is like the most heartbreaking ending I've heard to an album in a long time, especially one that has this really cool, like, winding listening experience. It is a super mournful and upsetting track. If it was inspired by someone's real life passing, I wouldn't be surprised at all. I think this is a beautifully composed album here. I think it's great. It actually got a legitimate emotional response out of me, which many of these have been getting. Like, again, I mentioned earlier how this is like a shockingly good release here, and or a shockingly good chart, because so many of these are just that good for no reason. Of course, they can't all be winners. Next one is Mushroom Village with Strawberry Fields. This one's not as much mushrooms and them being alive and all that stuff. It's more about like little gnomes or little mouse people, judging just by the picture of this little release here. You could tell the picture depicts like little life living inside of mushrooms. And I don't want to point fingers, but this is the worst release so far, and maybe that's got something to do with it. It's very standard comfy synth. It's not like a blend of anything. It's just straightforward comfy synth trying to be cute, which sometimes falls flat. I mean, for comfy synth, I think you need to kind of appeal to nostalgia in a way, or you need to appeal to something fantastical in a way. Like, you really need to appeal to the Hobbit idea. That's honestly why that one dungeon synth artist, I'm totally blanking on his name, but he's doing amazing stuff right now. Hole Dweller. That's the one. It's Hole Dweller is making bangers right now. I didn't enjoy his last album that much, but the older dungeon synth material is just so good. And you really need to point to a specific appeal in every song to really maximize what you're doing here. This is a fun release conceptually. It has some decent variety and texture, at least more than the Bandcamp fodder I listen to like once a week, but there's not a ton going on. Melodically, it tries way too hard. It just doesn't have the texture or the underlying beat to really give it the space it needs. It's more like it has too much space and it's trying to overcompensate. I will say the song Butterfly is really cool though. I think that's the best one on the release here. If you would have to listen to a song, I would recommend that one. But it's okay. I mean, I didn't hate it by any means. And this goes into maybe my favorite name of any of these releases. The artist is Hideous Gumphidious, and they dropped a new album this year. I don't even remember if I listened to it, but this is the debut. It's just called Spore Sorcery. This one is totally different, as it is no longer about mushroom people or living in a mushroom village. This is about a witch. And it is far too conceptually silly to be this good. And it is shockingly cohesive. Like you can look at this album cover and you probably predict something that sounds totally silly, but the atmosphere is like so thick and hazy and weird. It is shockingly eerie. There are some drums on this release here, which is very repetitive, but it's also very minimalist at the same time. It's just to either give it a little bit of momentum or just be a little eerie, be kind of tribal, be a little bit, just give it a little bounce. But this thing is tense, and sometimes it's very hypnotic, you know, where the drums are just doing the same thing and the synths just are just creeping in. It's simple, again, as many of these are, but that's how it should be. You know, the atmosphere is completely palpable. You feel like you can feel fog in the air listening to this thing. It's so cool. But it's another great one. And next is Scary Forest Tales with Mysterious Cave. I believe this is the first one to not mention mushrooms in the title. I bet the album art is right there, as you can see, or right there. It's got a lot of isolated textures of various warbling effects. It's very meditative overall, but it is not at all detailed. It's like super minimalist just in general. And with that, it kind of lacks interest for me. It doesn't really have the texture to really justify its length. It does make for a satisfying product. It's just got an iffy fidelity for me. It's like really on the bridge for everything it does. Generally, it does have pleasing texture. It just might leave you bored a bit. And there's not much wrong with this, but there's also just not a ton going on, which is its biggest struggle. So I think it's okay. And this is going into Fairy Ring with Dark Magic. Magic with a K. Magic for some reason. This is a really weird one because it sounds like just distorted field recordings. It's certainly calming, and it's certainly a bit eerie, and it's certainly still field recordings. There are some slightly different soundscapes explored here. I remember reading somewhere that people say this is just a harsh noise record, like this is all artificially made soundscapes. Like, they're not actually field recordings. It's like fake field recordings, which I can't confirm any of that. I hope it's not fake field recordings because I think the textures are all right. But this is just a release that doesn't do much for me. It's cool for what it is. It makes an atmosphere. I'm sure you could play it for a Dungeons & Dragons campaign. I personally wouldn't. I find it okay. And then we go into Robert Davies with Terrestre, which now we're out of the dungeon synth territory. That last album wasn't even like actually dungeon synth. It was like dungeon field recordings. But this is just like really, really drony ambient. It's serene stuff and it is absolutely okay. It's very much background stuff. It's super drony and it doesn't do that much for me. And it's clearly not even dungeon synth. Like, it was released by a guy who's shelved out like so many other albums and they're hard to even find. They feel like some weird nature-themed whatever. It feels like it was actually made for a chart like this. Like, it feels like it was like commissioned by some bigger company. Like, the album cover just doesn't look right to me, but I'd say it's okay. Like, you can't really have a bad time with it. It's just, you're not going to have a great time either. It's a little on the boring side. It's probably my least favorite album on this whole chart. And then I mentioned this release earlier. This is the New Age one. This is Inuyama Land with Music for Mixami Seats, which I probably didn't pronounce that right, but it's a banger. It's actually only one of 2 releases of this whole chart that is available on Spotify, the other one being the very first one we talked about, Assorted Mushrooms of New England. But this is very pleasant sounding new age. It's frequently ambient with a lot of really fun textures. It feels very much alive. The songs are definitely on the longer side, and they're certainly pretty repetitive. You'll easily reach 6 or 7 minutes here, but they're very stimulating. Like, the textures, they buzz in your head really nicely. And it is a great album to focus to. I feel like it will stimulate you almost intellectually in a way. The song Pixie actually feels kind of epic. It is a much more dense track, and I feel like that's where its strength lies. And there are some more synthetic field recording bits in here that some people might not like, but I think it's cool how he made synths sound like birds or like wind or various other textures. I thought it was a really cool thing. This is another great album on this chart, certainly a different one, but I like how it's a little bit different here. Those are all the releases on this chart, and I just want to mention how a long time ago, one of my first videos, I did the Gusick chart. So most of you probably don't even remember that one, but it was like 9 Gusick releases, which was all cats on the covers, and it was all shoegaze or slowcore, and crazy consistent stuff there. Like, not everything was great, but a lot of it was. And today we got a shocking amount of good dungeon synth. If this was a random dungeon synth chart and it was all dungeon synth and people in it was this often this good, I'd genuinely be shocked, especially with the lack of listeners on these things. This is some really underrepresented stuff that I think you guys all should listen to. But happy October. Hope you guys enjoy this chart. I'd appreciate a like and subscribe. Click that down there. Any comments, questions, or concerns? What's your favorite album that has a mushroom on it or talks about a mushroom or eating mushrooms or being a mushroom or whatever? I'd love to hear about it. Comments, questions, and concerns, comment section down below. My social media, my Instagram, my Twitter, and my Discord. Please join my Discord because we're talking about music and it's always super fun. All in the description down below. My Instagram, if y'all want to hire me for mixing your music or editing a video, certainly different from editing my own YouTube videos here, but I can send you something I've worked on recently, and I'd love to talk to you guys there. But that's about it. Hope you guys are doing well out there. Have a good day. Bye.